Welcome in, everybody, to another week of UFL Weekly. I am Kyle Krajewski, joined by my king, my Louisville king, Zach Cole. Zach, how's it going, my man?
It is going pretty well. I feel like a broken record, but I'm fired up. We got another week. We got plenty of stuff to talk about. We're going to get into some meat and potatoes of these rosters today, and talk about some of our favorites for the season. And I'm excited. I can't wait.
Yeah, we are officially just over a week away. Week kicks off next week, March 27th. We are recording this on March 18th. So we've got a little over a week here. Before we get into this, we are UFL Weekly. We're here to chat all things UFL Weekly. Um, we are going to look into power rankings. We're going to do all right. I'm calling them power rankings, but this isn't our we're not putting this like stamp of approval to like get like just to get like shit talked online. We're doing this to just be like, all right, this is kind of where we think things stand for these teams going into week one. And quite honestly, after week one, this could look completely upside down. We're
Mhm.
just kind of doing this as a way to say, like, all right, here's how we kind of expect or are looking at this team going into week one. And honestly, who knows? Maybe after week two, we revisit this to say, like, all right, we were clearly very wrong. Um, who knows? The Storm are actually the best team in the league. Um, so we're calling it power rankings, but that's kind of just how I want to call it. But it's basically just team by team preview. But we're kind of starting, uh, I guess, where we would say is probably the weakest team, and going to who we would think is the best team. Before we do that, real quick, roster cuts take place tomorrow. Or if you're literally watching or listening to this day of release, it is today. It is March 19th. Roster cuts take place March 19th. It's possible you're listening to this on the weekend, and it happened a couple days ago. Um, Roster cuts, essentially roster finalization, happens this week, we'll call it, where they cut their teams down to 50, and we kind of see what these final rosters look like. Probably get a really good look at who some of these teams QB1 is, because that is up in the air for just about all of these teams, or most of these teams. Um, so keep an eye out next week. I mean, next week we'll be doing our week one preview, but we'll have a better
Mhm.
idea of who's going to be going in as the RB1 for any team. Because right now it's a coin flip, or a three-sided die flip. Um, so that's what we're looking at today and tomorrow and the week ahead.
Yeah, Kyle, I just want to interject real quick. I think that the sentiment is that this is some of the best talent too that we've
Yeah,
seen in
in
the
a while.
UFL just in a while. Yeah, and that I think comes from some of the just pre-existing teams and pre-existing rosters that we're seeing carrying over into this season. And I think people are expecting this to really be difficult for teams to get this trimmed down to that 50 number, and there could be some potentially really skilled players being cut. So I think this is one of the first years where we can look to see that maybe some of these guys that are getting cut might end up elsewhere, might end up getting shots, that they might not have gotten in years past, just because I think the talent level is that much higher this year.
Yeah, it definitely looks like, I mean, we're looking at, we have a whole sheet of every roster currently in the UFL, and every highlighted name is everyone new to the UFL, and it looks like every team has like a whole new identity almost. Especially
Mm-hmm.
these newer teams, the Kings, the Aviators, the Storm, and technically also the Gamblers. It, I mean, those brand new teams kind of they adopted previous teams and their rosters, but I mean, there are completely different identities in this league going into this year. And quite honestly, I think that's kind of what the UFL will probably look like year after year. And honestly, to me, that's the exciting part of it, where it's like, cool, we get to watch new guys try new things, get more experience under their belt. And I guess that's the excitement of the league to me, is year after year. New guys, new excitement. Love it.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a UFL fan for sure. Then there's plenty of NFL former NFL talent on these rosters as well.
Yeah, you'll probably hear us highlight quite a bit of, I guess we'll call them familiar names, as we
Mhm.
kind of walk through these teams. I say walk, we're kind of be hopping, um, just so we're not talking for 5 hours here about each team and every player. More kind of highlighting, I guess, familiar names to us that kind of stood out, whether it's from previous spring football seasons or from guys we picked up on our fantasy football rosters in the NFL 5 years ago. Um, we'll be kind of highlighting what we can and what we will. So without further ado, we'll call this our UFL weekly power rankings. But let's start with Zach. You can kick us off here.
Yeah, our first team, and as you mentioned, Kyle, this is just I like to think of a rough draft of what our power rankings might look like after week one. I think we need to get these teams on tape to be able to really make
Yeah.
uh, a solid estimation of what they can do and what they can't do. But the first team that we're going to take a look at today is going to be the Columbus Aviators, who are actually we kind of are making the comparison a little bit. They're more or less the roster of the Michigan Panthers from last year. It seems like they kind of just moved the team over to Columbus, the roster over to Columbus, I should say. So if I'm going to highlight one of the key losses for this team, it's got to be MV Perkins, Bryce
Oh yeah.
Perkins himself, who was the quarterback for the Michigan Panthers last year. Obviously, that's a huge loss, but they did bring in Jalen McClendon, who had some run in the UFL last year and was actually, I would say, one of the better quarterbacks in the league. He was definitely a standout. So, on top of that, Toa Tawa is back. He was a monster for them, rumbling touchdowns into the end zone. And another name that we highlighted was Gunnar Oaks, who was a very solid tight end for them, for the Michigan Panthers last year. So I think that those are three offensive names to kind of highlight that would definitely kind of be leading the way for this squad here. Defensively, I don't necessarily see any names that jump off the page, but Michigan was solid on the defensive side of the ball last year. But there's quite a bit of yellow, as Kyle alluded to. We have the list here with all the new names, and there's quite a bit of yellow on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll see what happens as far as them kind of finding an identity. And a lot of that comes down to the head coach as well. And as we mentioned in last week's episode, if you haven't listened, go back and listen. But Columbus is coming in with a new head coach in Ted Ginn Jr., former NFL wide receiver. So it's going to take them a little bit of time, I think, to kind of find their footing and figure out what identity they want to have and what Ginn's identity is for the team. So I think those are some of the storylines to kind of highlight underneath. Obviously, McClendon is a known name, but we're not exactly sure if that transition is going to be smooth coming into Columbus here with a new head coach and a new offense. So I think that there's a couple question marks, and I think that that's probably why we're putting them down at the 8 spot to start here, despite coming off a runner-up performance in last year's iteration of the league. I do think that we're this is one of the top teams to kind of keep an eye on going into week one. I think there's a lot of potential to see what they can do. So one more time at number 8, our number 8 spot for this week. Again, rough draft. Don't jump on us, Columbus fans, but our number 8 spot is going to be the Columbus Aviators.
I will say I'd like to chime in. I think as the UFL Weekly fan favorite team of the year, I guess I say fan favorite, show favorite. The Aviators, I think, are right now our front runner,
Mm,
because I think we're both big fans of this color scheme and I guess
hmm
just uniform outline. But who knows? We'll probably decide this week 2, week 3, and be like, no, this is we're loving what we're seeing here. This is who we're both rooting for.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
where that was last year, the Memphis Showboats last year, and that was a late season edition. I think they kind of went on a run of they had a rough season, but they went on a run where we were both just like, but we're enjoying this. We're enjoying this football that they're playing out here. Um, Speaking of Memphis Showboats, the roster of the Memphis Showboats last year, or the rights to those players, went to number 7 on our list, the Louisville Kings. There's a strong argument that the Kings could be, I guess, our number 8 here as well, in our power rankings. I think we went more with the Aviators being a slightly bigger unknown with, I guess, a completely different coaching staff, and losing kind of the key pieces of their team last year. But Louisville, I mean, we keep alluding to this list of a roster that exists and who didn't exist in the spring football in the UFL last year. Um, Louisville has a ton of yellow. However, they have, I'm just going to rattle off some names that are familiar to us. James Robinson, Benny Snell, both coming in at running back as, I guess, NFL talent that we've seen in years past. Lucky Jackson and Jonathan Adams, both with UFL slash XFL experience. Jonathan Adams last year was, I guess, a real standout in my eyes, offensively for the Showboats, where Lucky Jackson was a guy in DC a few years ago, actually, who really stood out and then kind of had a NFL stint in Minnesota. But this roster is new. A lot of new guys to the spring football world, and tagging in with it or tagging along with a new first time head coach in Chris Redman. This will likely be a team that has a slower start potentially. Don't I mean you can quote me on that. Bully me all you'd like in the comments. But this is a new chemistry that needs to be formed, and we'll see that league wide. But I think this one specifically will kind of have a few hiccups, as this kind of roster develops. But I think we kind of see a little bit of progression from this team, especially as the season goes on.
Yeah, and Kyle, just alluding to transferring over those rosters, we talked about the showboats a little bit and how we kind of there were our lovable losers a little bit, and it is kind of a big jump for this team to try to find success this year. But hopefully, moving to a new location will maybe give them a new spark, and will give them just a fresh kind of air in the organization, and maybe better things will come their way. You mentioned there's a ton of talent coming into, so I guess we'll really have to kind of wait and see. And that's kind of the same story with our third team on our power ranks here. At the number 6 spot, we have I'll say the third and final quote expansion team here, or well, not expansion, but relocation team
Yeah,
in the Orlando Storm, and that is going to be formerly the roster of the San Antonio Brahmas, who another team that uh, underperformed last year. We really had high hopes for the Brahmas and what they could do, but they could really just they had a hard time figuring it out defensively on the defensive side of the ball. Ton of turnover on this team. You lose familiar names: Kellen Mond, Kevin Hogan, among other people. Anthony McFarland was a league leader last year, and that was a very common name. Not to mention guys like John Trey Kirkland, Alize Mack, guys that we know and associate with the UFL have all departed from this roster. But on the positive side, there are a lot of recognizable names that are coming in to this roster, namely DTR, Dorian Thompson Robinson, of Cleveland fame, is coming in here to be the quarterback for this squad potentially. He's obviously in a competition still with Jack Plummer, and Hank Bachmeyer, I believe that's how you say it. So on top of that, though, there's other names like actually there's a bunch of NFL names that I was pulling out here. Isaiah Buggs, defensive lineman; Lamar Jackson, not that Lamar Jackson, defensive back Lamar Jackson, um, and there just some other names. Who did I lose? I had another guy here. I don't know. Besides the point, but there's some previous NFL level talent coming into this roster, and it just kind of um, uh, opens the door for tons of possibilities. And I think that's why we have them currently listed at the 6th spot. On top of all that, they're bringing in arguably the most successful UFL coach that we've seen over the last couple of years, with Anthony Becht, formerly of the St. Louis Battlehawks. He's jumping ship, heading down to Orlando. So we'll see. He clearly has a winning equation, and if he can bring that on board with him down to Orlando, good things could be on the horizon for the Storm. So we'll see what can happen. They need to just definitely kind of invest in that talent and hope it puts them in a good spot to compete early on in the season. So I think that's why we have them at number 6 in our power ranks here. I think just that coaching gives them a step up.
Yeah, for sure. I think Becht is probably one of the better coaches in this league. And
Hmm.
he kind of gets a good little refresh down there in Orlando.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Next up, we have a rebrand of the Houston Gamblers. Previously, the Houston Roughnecks last year in the UFL, bringing in head coach Kevin Sumlin. This team defensively looks relatively the same, or I say the same, looks relatively familiar with in spring football world. There's a lot of guys kind of returning from last year's UFL and sticking around for this upcoming season. But offensively, it's a full kind of, it looks like a full refresh for this team at least. We got John Trey Kirkland coming in from Dallas. We have Justin Hall sticking around from last year's Houston team. But then we also bring in tight end Armani Rogers, who had quite a few years in the NFL. And in the running back room, we also have Kirk Merritt returning in Houston. He was a guy last year who was a huge part of this I guess Houston offense. But again, new coach, new scheme. We're gonna see a little bit of I guess different team here down in Houston, which I think is what the league was looking for. Um, but honestly, this is a solid but not overly explosive roster. Just kind of looking at it, to me, identity wise, it feels middle of the pack. But honestly, I hope to be proven wrong. I hope to be proven wrong about all of these guys. Obviously, I want everybody to succeed. I don't want to talk down on any team or anyone. It's just kind of how I'm visualizing it right now. But come on, Houston, let's see something cool this year.
Yeah, I would love for that new identity to really kind of pay off for them. And that we mentioned in last year's iterations that they were coming over as they were that weird team that was like a USFL team, but they were an XFL team. It was just kind of an
Yeah,
identity crisis for them. So hopefully, by just going to the Gamblers, by becoming a new team, bringing in Sumlin, they're just going new vibes across the board. So fingers crossed for them. Our fourth team is a very familiar team to UFL fans, spring football fans in general, and that's the St. Louis Battlehawks. So I would say that the Battlehawks' um, main issue this season is obviously we alluded to it. I alluded to it with with Orlando Storm. They lost Anthony Beck, their head coach. They hired internally and promoted one of their other coaches to go ahead and be their head coach this year. But I do think that that's going to be a big deal for them because it's not easy to just replace a head coach, nonetheless. So that'll be something to keep your eyes on early on in the season. Roster wise, they did lose a couple people. They lost, namely Max Duggan, who was their kind of leader at the quarterback position, and AJ McCarron as well. Jacob Sailors is was also a huge loss for them this season. He was again one of the best running backs in the UFL last year, but they bring back guys like Hakeem Butler, Jacor Pearson. I mean, names that we've known for a really long time here in the UFL. So I think all of these things combined together definitely gives us some faith in the St. Louis Battlehawks and what they can do. But we're still just because a couple of these other teams ahead, we got some names tied to them that are just too big to ignore and too hard to pass on. I think that's why we have them slotted in our 4 seed for the preseason here.
yep. And then following it up, next team here we have at number three. This is more of a, I guess, an experience thing. We have the Dallas Renegades. I think the key thing here, that I think will consistently be brought up for as long as he lives and plays in this realm is Luis Perez. He is consistently one of the most consistent quarterbacks in spring football. Last year
Mhm.
he was the led the league in passing yards. He is Mr. Consistent. Um, and they bring back wide receivers, Tyler Vaughns. They bring back Deontay Burton, and they bring in a NFL vet in Denzel Mims coming into the league, and I guess returning to the UFL, but here on the Renegades. Um, he's kind of their offensive identity, Perez. This is a veteran heavy roster with experience kind of across all positions, even Day Hunter returning at running back. There should be, I guess, this offensive consistency should keep them competitive week in and week out, especially to begin with, kicking off the season. Really, my biggest question mark here is the coaching staff, where we kind of see I guess someone new stepping in, working with, I guess, a team that has already been working with each other for the most part. So that's kind of my biggest question mark here for Dallas, but really their consistency on the roster is what I guess what leads them to our number three up here.
You're going to be in games if Luis Perez is is under center, and that's kind of like the underlying theme there with when it comes to Dallas. As for Birmingham, they are kind of re-identifying themselves. I would
Well,
say they've got some new faces, not only under under center, not only in the helmets, but also on the sideline. AJ McCarron, formerly of the St. Louis Battlehawks as quarterback, is now going to become the head coach of the Birmingham Stallions. More importantly, you might have seen his name in the news because he's really fired up that Gucci Mane is performing the halftime show of the opening kickoff, which is also a big point of emphasis
that's
for
for the
Birmingham.
I do want to point out, just sorry, Zach. Their home opener is in mid-April. I think they kick off in like week 3 or 4. Just scheduling, but you have
Gotcha.
until
Okay, so it's
mid-April
for
to
the
get your Gucci Mane tickets.
gotcha. That's right. April 18th, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Now
I
I'm
think
remembering
that's
you sent me that post
yeah.
earlier.
I
That's right.
think that's coming to me too.
So okay, so on top of AJ McCarron, they did lose Jamar Smith, who was huge for them down the stretch last year. I remember that very distinctly that he was a huge piece for them, as well as Jay Sternberger, who was another big name that they kind of lost this offseason. But I would say that I would argue they probably have one of the most recognizable receiving cores: Justin Ross, Dion Kane, John Ross, formerly of the NFL, fastest man in the world at the combine, all that good stuff. Laviska Chenault's also on this receiving staff. So a lot of noticeable names coming into the season for them. But I think if there's one thing with Birmingham, there's usually a lot of movement in season in terms of personnel and guys that are starting to see the field. So it's going to be a little interesting to see how things settle down in Birmingham this season. Obviously, they've had nothing but success in the past couple of years, so they're going to be looking to continue and build on that success. And hopefully, AJ McCarron is ready to go. I mean, I think that there's just a lot of question marks, which is why I don't think we can give them the top spot in this year's power rankings, but or in this preseason power rankings. But I do think that they definitely have the potential to be one of the best teams in the league.
Speaking of best teams in the league, why don't we talk about last year's UFL champions, the DC Defenders? They are rounding out our list here at our number one spot, and truthfully, it feels a little easy and cheating to put them at number one, mostly because they are, I guess, the most intact team from last year,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a huge benefit to start with, but that's also a huge benefit in them already having been the champion. Um, there is full coaching staff continuity. The offense and the defense is, I guess, I say nearly identical. There's obviously some new names. Jordan Teamu is still the quarterback for DC. This guy
Mm-hmm.
has been again, Mr. Consistent, similar to Luis Perez for, I guess, spring football here. Deion Jackson was one of the better running backs in the league last year.
Mm-hmm.
Abram Smith is backing him up, which is insane considering he was the XFL Offensive Player of the Year a few years ago. Uh, Ty Scott, Braylon Sanders, Cornell Powell, Kiki QT on in the receiver room. This is an offense, Briley Moore. This is an offense that is going to score and control the ball a little bit, I guess, more efficiently than we can assume other teams can, mostly because they played with each other last year. So the advantage that DC has going into this year is consistency. They won the championship last year and then said, let's do it again with the same guys, where every other team kind of has, I guess, the knock on them where they are seeing new rosters, seeing new coaching in new locations. It's a little bit trickier, more hurdles for the other teams where DC just said, let's just do it all again. So that
Mm.
is why we've got DC here going into week one as our number one team.
All right. Well, just to kind of take a look back and recap, Kyle, since we've gone through all 8 teams, I'm just going to go 8-1 here. We had Columbus Aviators at 8. We had the Louisville Kings at number 7, the Orlando Storm at number 6, the Houston Gamblers at number 5. And then our top 4 was the St. Louis Battlehawks at 4, the Dallas Renegades at 3, the Birmingham Stallions at 2, and you just wrapped us up with the DC Defenders at 1. So I guess let's go ahead and just discuss really briefly, really quickly, without getting too far into it. Where do you think your biggest disagreement with our current rough draft of rankings lies?
Uh, I feel like in general, our bottom four teams are just wrong. I feel like that's
Mm,
just by default. Our bottom four in the Aviators, the Kings, the Storm, and the Gamblers are
mhm.
wrong. I firmly believe one or two or three or all four will prove us wrong and could flip this entirely upside down. And that's the beauty of this league. But I think that's where I think we might be wrong, is where who we're doubting essentially could prove us wrong.
Yeah, I would say that my biggest qualm is probably Columbus being at 8. I do think that they bring back enough of that talent from the Michigan Panthers team that was in the championship just a year ago to at least kind of keep things afloat. I think that they could definitely be better than we have them ranked. But again, this is why it's a rough draft, and this is why it's subject to change, and we could see very different things in just a couple weeks. So I would say that that's probably the biggest thing for me right now.
All right, Zach. Question for you then:
Hit me.
do you think I hyped up DC, but do you think there's a clear gap between DC and I guess the rest of the field?
I I think that you definitely make a valid point for it, being that their roster is just so strong top to bottom, and we keep bringing up the yellow, and people don't know what we're talking about, but the our spreadsheet we're looking at here has yellow highlighting all of the new players on a team, and I mean you look at these expansion teams, or I keep saying expansion, but these rebranded teams and even like Dallas and Birmingham even, but like you go to DC and there's like maybe a little more than 10 to 15 new faces on this 64 man roster that they have right now, which is just unbelievable. So I do think that they are the best team, but I think that there's a smaller margin between them and I'll say Birmingham right now. I think Birmingham's also got a very solid team. I think that there's a smaller gap between those two than there is between those two and the rest of the league. So I agree with you. I'm on board. DC I do think has the leg up going into the season here, but I think it's a small kind of margin of difference between them and Birmingham versus them and the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think I'm with you where it feels like there is a top tier and it is those two teams. And it's almost like the question is who competes to join them, as opposed to which
Mhm.
of them doesn't uh, doesn't make it. Um, I think we're going to see. I don't know. We're going to see a damn good season. Is all I know.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I,
Absolutely.
I think the big question marks we have going into this season for me is like the excitement of it all, because then it's just like, all right,
Mhm.
what are we seeing this week? And that's beautiful to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Zach. Quick ask for you then. Who do you think? I guess we already kind of answered this, but what do you think our championship game looks like?
Ooh, that's tricky, especially because, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the format of this year's league, it can be anyone versus anyone, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting
So
thing to
you're giving me
kind of consider here.
I mean, wait, just answered this, but give me your best two teams, or who do you think is the better team at the end of the year, essentially?
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's hard not to go with DC and Birmingham right now. I think that they're the two most established teams. But you know what? I'm gonna say DC and St. Louis. I just
All
something
right.
St. Louis always seems to be right there in it, and I'm hoping maybe that with Birmingham having a little bit of uncertainty, this might be the year that St. Louis kind of overcomes the hump and can get into that conversation. What about you?
Oh, Zach, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna
Uh
say something insane. I'd like to see Orlando prove us wrong. I'd like to see Orlando kind
oh.
of be that team that at the end of the season we're like, oh yeah, no, we doubted them.
Mhm.
And maybe for them it's the color scheme. Maybe that's another fun. These teams, these new teams here are a fantastic design. I have to say that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's DC. But I'd like to throw Orlando in there in the championship game just to see what that looks like.
I like that. I like the thought of one of these new teams getting in there and getting their hands dirty on the first go around.
Heck yeah, yeah. Bring in I guess, or give us a fully new team or no new championship. Let's see a Louisville versus Orlando. Let's see that bright green
That would
versus
be
the
something.
orange. That's like a 2012 Nike fluorescent daydream.
Yeah, it is. A Nike Elite Fit
Yep,
in middle school.
yep. All right. Uh, and Zach, who, if you had to throw a name or two in here for in the MVP talk, who you got?
I think the first name that I'm gonna throw out, I'd like to alternate names with you here,
I'm
just
with
just
you.
so I can make sure we're not stealing the same guy. But
Yeah.
the first name I'm gonna throw out is gonna be Jalen McClendon. I really
Yep.
think that he's special, man. I liked what he did last year. He was third in the league in passing with only 7 games played. He ranked on the top rushers list too. It wasn't super impressive. It was only 100 yards rushing, but still, I mean, he was on the list. And if I remember correctly, I think he found the end zone a couple times running the ball. But I don't know. I think he's kind of got that it factor that you look for with quarterbacks specifically. So I don't know. I just think that he could be something special, especially filling in the shoes of Bryce Perkins, who won the MVP last year.
Yeah, we saw. I Man, Clendon was a great pull. Yeah, he had a few great games
Hmm.
last year. I'm gonna throw in, I guess, the Spring King himself, Luis Perez. He's kind of
Hmm.
always in the MVP talks just from passing volume alone. So if we see some wins from this Dallas Renegades team, Luis Perez may find himself finally I say finally, may find himself in the I guess holding the MVP trophy.
And I'll go running back for my next one here. I'm gonna go with it's low hanging fruit, but I'm gonna go with Deion Jackson.
Ooh,
We know what DC does. We know DC keeps the ball on the ground. They love to to run the ball and establish that dominance between the tackles. So I'm going to go ahead and say he has a huge season this year and is a top rusher in the league. And I know that we don't love to give the MVP to running backs or receivers as much, but I'm going to say that he racks up the yardage, racks up the touchdowns, and ends up being too hard to ignore.
I love it. Yeah, the last guy I'm going to throw in here is Matt Corral, quarterback from Birmingham.
Mhm.
This could be a guy who, I mean, if Birmingham wins and he's the strong reason why, Matt Corral, MVP, nothing too much more to add there.
Yep, love it.
All right, Zach, we're pushing over 35 minutes here. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Again, I want to remind everybody tuning in, we will be doing our week one preview next week. We're here. We made it to
Hmm.
UFL kickoff next week. So next week we'll be doing our week one preview, kind of going game by game, basically what we're looking for in each game. And Zach and I will be doing our game picks, which Zach, we split even. We were dead even last year in our end of year picks, which is insane. So for new listeners or watchers, we do it a weekly. We pick a spread and we pick an over under for each game. And last
Mhm.
year we tied, which is bonkers. But that's what you can look forward to seeing next week when we go game by game and just kind of highlight what we're looking for, what we think is going to happen, and be proved wrong the absolute next day. So, with that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. We are UFL Weekly. We talk all things UFL weekly. Feel free to, if you're watching us, you can listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening to us, you can follow us, find us on YouTube. Just search UFL Weekly and you will find us. You can see our beautiful faces on the YouTube screen, however you watch your YouTube content. So with all that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. And let us know who you think will, who you think is going to win the UFL championship, and tell us why we're wrong. Because we are wrong constantly. Um, but again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here. Talk to you next week.
See ya.